College commencement addresses often are collections of bromides and boring advice. You know what I mean. Go forth, graduates, and save the planet. You are the nation's hope. You have worked hard and learned much from devoted faculty. And don't forget to floss and to use sunscreen. Boring. Just once, a commencement speaker should puncture the smug complacency and cloying self-congratulation on campuses. Someone should give the following commencement address. Members of the graduating class, you who are about to receive your diploma should also receive an apology from this university and a refund of a large portion of the tuition you have paid. You have been cheated, bilked, propagandized, and badly educated. Your tuition has been much too costly, for which you can blame the federal government and the avarice of the university. Washington has produced a bubble in higher education just the way it produced the bubble in housing. Some government planners decided that too few people owned homes. So the planners decided to force an increase in home ownership. They lowered lending standards for people seeking a mortgage. This produced a glut of subprime loans and subprime borrowers, and then a crash. Next, some government geniuses decided that there were too few college students. So government made student loans and other tuition subsidies easier to get. Of course, colleges and universities responded by increasing tuition to capture these government subsidies, which is why the cost of college has been rising 4 times faster than the rate of inflation. The cost of college has increased faster than the cost of health care. There is now well over $1 trillion of student loan debt. There is more student loan debt than credit card debt or than auto loan debt. Most of you are graduating today with debt. In effect, you are graduating with a mortgage, but no house. And what did you get for all this expense? A subprime education. Today's students study many fewer hours a week than students did a generation ago, but they are getting higher grades. This, too, is a result of government creating perverse incentives. The government money gives colleges and universities a powerful incentive to admit more and more students. Inevitably, this means more and more students who are marginally qualified or unqualified. Many of these will pay tuition for a few semesters and then leave school with debt but no degree. Others will plod along, paying tuition, piling up debt, and eventually getting a degree, but not in 4 years. You have seen the T-shirts that read, "College, the best 7 years of my life." Those of you who majored in gender studies, or women's studies, or ethnicity studies, or cinema deconstruction, or any other of today's academic fads, to you I have this advice. When this commencement ceremony is over and you take off your cap and gown, do not bother looking for a job. Instead, go straight to the unemployment office. This university did not equip you to add value to the American economy. Soon, this university's office in charge of alumni giving will ask you for money. Your response should be, "Are you kidding?" Instead of sending money to this university, just send a schedule of your student loan repayments. If this campus is like most campuses, you have been living in a community of enforced conformity. When you leave and enter the real world, you are in for a shock. If this is a typical campus, it has a speech code. It has forbidden and punished speech that did not conform to fashionable political pieties. If this is a typical campus, it has used its speech code to teach you that you have a special entitlement, that you are entitled to pass through life without hearing any speech that annoys, depresses, confuses, offends, or otherwise distresses you. If this campus is like many campuses, it has a free speech zone, a small, isolated, inconvenient space where students are allowed to exercise First Amendment rights. But guess what? Off campus, out in reality, no one recognizes this entitlement. You are going to discover that the Constitution makes the rest of America, all of it, a free speech zone. This school has restricted speech in order to protect your tender sensitivities and to protect your feelings from being hurt. When you leave this campus, you will have to unlearn the silliness you have been taught here, the idea that you deserve to be treated as a frail flower. So, graduates, you have been saddled with debt and bad ideas. Good luck. You are going to need it. There. That would be a commencement address worth hearing. But a university sensible enough to invite such a speaker would be a university that does not need to hear such an address. I'm George Will for Prager University.
Ever hear complaints about big banks, big oil, and big pharma? I'll bet you have. But there's another big that you rarely hear about. Big unions. And I'm not talking about private company unions like auto and steel workers. Only 6.7% of workers belong to private sector unions. No, I'm talking about public employee unions. They're very big and very powerful. Far bigger and more powerful than most people know. In fact, the impact they have on how state and local governments operate makes big banks, big oil, and big pharma look small by comparison. But before I explain why, I should explain who the public employee unions are. They're the unions that represent policemen, firemen, sanitation workers, teachers, and the vast army of others, the bureaucrats who administer city, state, and federal government. The public service unions negotiate on behalf of these workers for their wages, benefits, and working conditions. And who's on the other side of the bargaining table? Our elected representatives, the people in charge of spending the money we pay to government in taxes. Think about this for a moment, and you will immediately realize that the goal of the public employee unions is to negotiate with union-friendly politicians. And the way to get friendly with the politician is to help him get elected, which is exactly what the unions do. First, they have a lot of money. In many states, working for the government is a closed shop. That is, to work for the government, you have to pay dues to the union. This guarantees these unions a large membership and a large pot of cash. Spreading this money around, especially in local elections, goes a long way. Second, unions provide union-friendly candidates at no charge with seasoned political activists to help run campaigns. These activists marshal other union members to put up campaign signs, work the phones, and gather up loyal voters on Election Day. This is a proven strategy, and candidates, especially in the big cities where there are a lot of public employees, know it. Courting union support is critical to victory. We will fight for a fair contract, New Jersey gubernatorial candidate John Corzine said to a rally of 10,000 public workers in 2006. But fight who for a fair contract? The person the unions would be fighting if Corzine were to win the election, he did, is Corzine. The Speaker of the New York State Assembly once told a United Federation of Teachers rally, "I and my colleagues in the Assembly majority will be your best friends in Albany." Exactly right. In California, in 2010, an official of the Service Employees International Union, known by its initials, the SEIU, told elected officials, "We helped to get you into office, and we got a good memory. Come November, if you don't back our program, we'll get you out of office." Again, exactly right. As Dan Walters of the Sacramento Bee wrote, public employee unions wield immense, even hegemonic influence over the Democratic majorities in the California state legislature. What is the consequence of all this power? The most obvious consequence is that cities and states overpay their workers by a lot. Trash collection in Dallas, Texas, a state whose government workers are not unionized, costs $74 per ton. Trash collection in Chicago, whose government workers are unionized, costs $231 per ton. These kinds of inefficiencies exist everywhere public unions dominate. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is the pension arrangements that provide public employees with retirement benefits that vastly exceed the retirement benefits in the private sector. 4 cities in California, Vallejo, Stockton, Mammoth Lakes, and San Bernardino, have declared bankruptcy largely because of the burden of paying public employee pensions. The same is true of Detroit, the nation's largest bankruptcy ever, and it's only getting worse. By 2030, the number of retired public workers will equal the number of working public workers. You can read more about this in my book, Government Against Itself, but suffice it to say that this is not a pretty picture. All this spending on public service unions crowds out tax money for things we need, such as better roads, services, and schools. Finally, some courts and politicians have summoned the courage to make much-needed reforms. But it's never easy, as we saw in Wisconsin in 2011, when thousands of union protesters overran the state capitol for weeks. But reform is coming. It must. If it doesn't, cities like Detroit will be the rule, not the exception. So the next time someone complains about big banks, big oil, or big pharma, ask if they're equally concerned about big unions. They should be. I'm Daniel DeSalvo, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the City College of New York.
Join Prager University. Click here to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click here to sign up for free at prageru.com for quizzes, contests, and prizes.
Should America be the world's policeman? Whenever this question is asked, and it has been asked for nearly 100 years, the answer is usually no. Progressives will say that it suggests American arrogance. Who made America the boss of the world? Many conservatives, especially those with libertarian leanings, will answer that what other countries do to their neighbors or even to their own people is of no concern of ours. But here's the question that is almost never asked. What's the alternative? Well, one answer is the United Nations. That's why the UN was formed after the Second World War, to maintain order and protect human rights. And that's why there are UN peacekeepers around the world. But their record at keeping the peace is abysmal. To cite just one example, at least 500,000 people were slaughtered in Rwanda in 1994, while UN peacekeepers stood by. Furthermore, the United Nations' nearly 200 members seldom agree on anything. And when they do marshal a peacekeeping force, its numbers are always small, they are poorly armed and highly restricted in their use of the few weapons they do possess. They are much more likely to step aside when faced with aggression than to actively oppose it. What about dividing the world into spheres of influence? Is that really a good idea? Do we want a world where Russia gets to do what it wants toward democratic neighbors such as Latvia, and Iran dominates its region, and so on? Would such a world lead to peace or to ever more violent competition over the borders of those spheres? And, of course, there's an idea that if America leaves the world alone, the world will leave America alone. If only. The Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky once said that you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Great powers don't get to take a vacation and don't get to take themselves off the terrorist target list. So, we quickly come to an inescapable conclusion. The United States is the world's policeman because there is no alternative, and everybody knows it. But what if Americans don't want the job anymore? What if the cop walked off the beat? The answer is clear and well-grounded both in history and current events. When America retreats, the bad guys advance. It's not a coincidence that after the U.S. pulled its troops out of Iraq, Islamic State exploded onto the world stage. And while it's easy to criticize America for its perceived failures in Vietnam and the first few years in Iraq, what about its obvious successes? After the Second World War ended in 1945, the Soviet Union sought to dominate the world. It failed for one reason. The United States stopped it. In 1991, we stopped Saddam Hussein and kicked him out of Kuwait. Later, we intervened to save the Balkans. As I write in my book, America in Retreat, the order the U.S. has provided has not only had enormous security benefits for all the world, it has produced phenomenal economic advantages. Global GDP, just $11 trillion in 1980, doubled by the time the Cold War ended a decade later. By 2012, it reached $72 trillion. The debate over the value of an American supervised peace, Pax Americana, should have been settled long ago. But history only settles great debates for as long as people remember the history. Many college students today could barely identify the Soviet Union, let alone explain how its plans to impose communism on nation after nation were defeated. Americans have lived in a relatively orderly world for so long that many have become complacent about maintaining it. Perhaps that explains why, in recent years, the United States has adopted a foreign policy that neglects to do the things that have made that orderly world possible. Commitments to global security, military forces adequate to meet those commitments, a willingness to intervene in regional crises to protect allies and to confront or deter aggressive regimes. If the world's leading liberal democratic nation doesn't assume its role as world policeman, the world's rogues will try to fill the breach. Then the world would be very much like it was in the 1930s, when Western self-doubt, war weariness, economic turmoil, American self-involvement, and the rise of ambitious dictatorships combined to produce unprecedented death and mayhem. Not everyone grows up wanting to be a cop, but no one wants to live in a neighborhood or a world where there is no cop. Would you? I'm Brett Stevens.
Join Prager University. Click here to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click here to sign up for free at PragerU.com for quizzes, contests, and prizes.
I want to talk to you about the Electoral College and why it matters. All right, I know this doesn't sound like the most sensational topic of the day, but stay with me because I promise you it's one of the most important. To explain why requires a very brief civics review. The President and Vice President of the United States are not chosen by a nationwide popular vote of the American people. Rather, they are chosen by 538 electors. This process is spelled out in the United States Constitution. Why didn't the founders just make it easy and let the presidential candidate with the most votes claim victory? Why did they create, and why do we continue to need this Electoral College? The answer is critical to understanding not only the Electoral College, but also America. The founders had no intention of creating a pure majority rule democracy. They knew from careful study of history what most have forgotten today or never learned. Pure democracies do not work. They implode. Democracy has been colorfully described as two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. In a pure democracy, bare majorities can easily tyrannize the rest of a country. The founders wanted to avoid this at all costs. This is why we have three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. It's why each state has 2 senators, no matter what its population, but also different numbers of representatives based entirely on population. It's why it takes a supermajority in Congress and 3/4 of the states to change the Constitution. And it's why we have the Electoral College. Here's how the Electoral College works. The presidential election happens in 2 phases. The first phase is purely democratic. We hold 51 popular elections every presidential election year, 1 in each state and 1 in D.C. On Election Day in 2012, you may have thought you were voting for Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, but you were really voting for a slate of presidential electors. In Rhode Island, for example, if you voted for Barack Obama, you voted for the state's 4 Democratic electors. If you voted for Mitt Romney, you were really voting for the state's 4 Republican electors. Part 2 of the election is held in December, and it is this December election among the state's 538 electors, not the November election, which officially determines the identity of the next president. At least 270 votes are needed to win. Why is this so important? Because the system encourages coalition building and national campaigning. In order to win, a candidate must have the support of many different types of voters from various parts of the country. Winning only the South or the Midwest is not good enough. You cannot win 270 electoral votes if only one part of the country is supporting you. But if winning were only about getting the most votes, a candidate might concentrate all of his efforts in the biggest cities or the biggest states. Why would that candidate care about what people in West Virginia or Iowa or Montana think? But you might ask, isn't the election really only about the so-called swing states? Actually, no. If nothing else, safe and swing states are constantly changing. California voted safely Republican as recently as 1988. Texas used to vote Democrat. Neither New Hampshire nor Virginia used to be swing states. Most people think that George W. Bush won the 2000 election because of Florida. Well, sort of, but he really won the election because he managed to flip one state which the Democrats thought was safe, West Virginia. Its 4 electoral votes turned out to be decisive. No political party can ignore any state for too long without suffering the consequences. Every state, and therefore every voter in every state, is important. The Electoral College also makes it harder to steal elections. Votes must be stolen in the right state in order to change the outcome of the Electoral College. With so many swing states, this is hard to predict and hard to do. But without the Electoral College, any vote stolen in any precinct in the country could affect the national outcome, even if that vote was easily stolen in the bluest California precinct or the reddest Texas one. The Electoral College is an ingenious method of selecting a president for a great, diverse republic such as our own. It protects against the tyranny of the majority, encourages coalition building, and discourages voter fraud. Our founders were proud of it. We can be too. I'm Tara Ross for Prager University.
Join Prager University. Click here to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click here to sign up for free at PragerU.com for quizzes, contests, and prizes.
In every presidential election, only one question matters. Which candidate will get the 270 votes needed to win the Electoral College? Our founders so deeply feared a tyranny of the majority that they rejected the idea of a direct vote for president. That's why they created the Electoral College. For more than 2 centuries, it has encouraged coalition building, given a voice to both big and small states, and discouraged voter fraud. Unfortunately, there is now a well-financed, below-the-radar effort to do away with the Electoral College. It is called National Popular Vote, or NPV, and it wants to do exactly what the founders rejected: award the job of president to the person who gets the most votes nationally. Even if you agree with this goal, it's hard to agree with their method. Rather than amend the Constitution, which they have no chance of doing, NPV plans an end run around it. Here's what NPV does. It asks states to sign a contract to give their presidential electors to the winner of the national popular vote instead of the winner of the state's popular vote. What does that mean in practice? It means that if NPV had been in place in 2004, for example, when George W. Bush won the national vote, California's electoral votes would have gone to Bush, even though John Kerry won that state by 1.2 million votes. Can you imagine strongly Democratic California calmly awarding its electors to a Republican? Another problem with NPV's plan is that it robs states of their sovereignty. A key benefit of the Electoral College system is that it decentralizes control over the election. Currently, a presidential election is really 51 separate elections, one in each state and one in D.C. These 51 separate processes exist side by side in harmony. They do not and cannot interfere with each other. California's election code applies only to California and determines that state's electors. So a vote cast in Texas can never change the identity of a California elector. NPV would disrupt this careful balance. It would force all voters into one national election pool. Thus, a vote cast in Texas will always affect the outcome in California. And the existence of a different election code in Texas always has the potential to unfairly affect a voter in California. Why? Because state election codes can differ drastically. States have different rules about early voting, registering to vote, and qualifying for the ballot. They have different policies regarding felon voting. They have different triggers for recounts. Each and every one of these differences is an opportunity for someone, somewhere, to file a lawsuit claiming unfair treatment. Why should a voter in New York get more or less time to early vote than a voter in Florida? Why should a hanging Chad count in Florida but not in Ohio? The list of possible complaints is endless. And think of the opportunities for voter fraud if NPV is passed. Currently, an attempt to steal a presidential election requires phony ballots to appear or real ballots to disappear in the right state or combination of states, something that is very hard to anticipate. But with NPV, voter fraud anywhere can change the election results. No need to figure out which states you must swing. Just add or subtract the votes you need or don't want, wherever you can most easily get away with it. And finally, if NPV is adopted and winning is only about getting the most votes, a candidate might concentrate all of his efforts in the biggest cities or the biggest states. We could see the end of presidential candidates who care about the needs and concerns of people in smaller states or outside of big cities. Here's why all of this is of so much concern. NPV is more than halfway to its goal. NPV's contract will go into effect when states with a combined 270 electoral votes have signed. To date, NPV already has the support of 10 states plus D.C. Together, that's 165 electoral votes, leaving only 105 votes to go. It is time to stop this attempt to undo the way American presidents are elected, which will in turn undo America. The people behind NPV think they are wiser than every generation of Americans that preceded them. They aren't. I'm Tara Ross for Prager University.
Many people believed that the election of a black president would advance America to a new era of racial harmony. That belief proved to be mistaken. In retrospect, it was naive to think that a single event, even the election of a black president, would wash away a stain so deeply ingrained in our culture. The debate about how much racism there is in America, and specifically the disparity between the races, is just as fierce as ever. That's okay with me. Discrimination still exists. Let's deal with it openly and honestly. Unfortunately, that's very hard to do. One reason I've discovered is that many people feel that they have to treat blacks with kid gloves. They think this is noble, enlightened, progressive. It's not. It's demeaning and condescending. In fact, it's racist. A recent experience brought this home to me. In an anthropology class, my professor decided to discuss the shooting of Michael Brown, a black teenager, by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Before I tell you what transpired, I need to tell you something about this professor. First of all, I like her very much. She's interesting and engaging, but more importantly, she took a non-PC approach to the class, which I found refreshing. She encouraged us to study the data dispassionately and draw our conclusions from that. But when the subject of Ferguson came up, all this objectivity went out the window. When a classmate said, following a debate over the details of the case, that the facts ultimately don't matter, my professor agreed. All that matters, this classmate added, is that a black boy was killed by a white cop. Another example of racism in a racist society, pure and simple. So therefore, riots that followed the grand jury decision not to indict the officer were the legitimate reactions of people who just couldn't take it anymore. And that's when I knew that what I was really hearing was not an expression of compassion and understanding, but something else. Rioting and looting are acceptable forms of behavior? Why? Because the rioters and looters have no other options? Really? In free democratic America, you have no other options? Does this apply to all ethnic groups? Hispanics? Southeast Asians? Pacific Islanders? Of course not. But we, the enlightened ones, are ready with a pre-packaged list of excuses when blacks riot and loot. Worse, when it comes to judging black behavior, even facts don't matter. All that matters is the skin color of the teenager and the skin color of the cop. Well, not in my world. If a white cop kills a white kid, the facts matter. If a black cop kills a black kid, the facts matter. If a black cop kills a white kid, the facts matter. And if a white cop kills a black kid, the facts matter. To suggest anything else is to perpetuate discrimination, the very thing that those who espouse social justice claim to want to end. Anyone, whether white or any other color, who excuses blacks for bad behavior just because they are black obviously doesn't consider blacks their equal. Rather, they view blacks, in effect, as children who are unable to adhere to the standards to which every other group is held. Think carefully about that. The only difference between this view and that of white supremacists is that white supremacists are honest and open. In their view, blacks are inferior to whites, period. But those who condescend to blacks cloak themselves in self-righteousness, so somehow that makes it okay. The bad behavior happens, a riot in Ferguson, and they nod knowingly. They couldn't take it anymore. Who can blame them? I'll take the white supremacists any day. First, there are very few of them, and they have no power. Second, I can easily prove them wrong. But how do I shake off the condescenders, the patronizers? There are a lot of them, they have a lot of power, and they think they mean well. How do I convince them that as a black human being, I want to be, I must be, judged by the same standards as everybody else? So how about this for a change? Treat blacks equally, always, in every way. Not differently, not better, not worse. Not like we're demons, not like we're angels. Is that so hard to do? Because if we really want racial harmony, not to mention an end to racism, that's the only way to get there. I'm Chloe Valdery for Prager University.
Every year on Earth Day, we're supposed to reflect on all the ways we've made the planet worse. But what if we try something different? What if we reflect on all the ways we've made the planet better? Try this thought experiment. Imagine that we transported someone from 300 years ago, at the very start of the Industrial Revolution, to today's world. What would he think about our environment? Without question, his reaction would be one of disbelief. Not that we had destroyed his pristine natural world, but that such a clean, healthy environment was possible. The air is so clean, our time traveler might say. Where I come from, we're breathing in smoke all day from the fire we need to burn in our furnaces and stoves. And the water. Everywhere I go, the water tastes so fresh, and it's all safe to drink. On my farm, we get our water from a brook we share with animals, and my kids are always getting sick. And then the weather. I mean, the weather isn't that much different, but you're so much safer in it. You can move a knob and make it cool when it's hot, and warm when it's cold. And what happened to all the disease? In my time, we had insects everywhere giving us disease. My neighbor's son died of malaria, and you don't seem to have any of that here. What's your secret? I'd tell him that the secret was energy, specifically energy derived from fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. These fuels power machines that allow us to transform our naturally hazardous environment into a far healthier environment. Most of the natural world is too hot or too cold, has too much rainfall or not enough. Then there's bacteria-filled water, disease-carrying insects, tornadoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis, to name just a few of nature's unpleasant features. As our time traveler noted, 300 years ago, human beings spent a lot of time breathing polluted air from indoor fires. As unhealthy as it was worth the warmth. But we've been able to conquer all these environmental hazards. We've drained swamps, reclaimed land, cleared forests, built roads, constructed glass and steel skyscrapers. We've irrigated deserts, developed fertilizers and pesticides, linked oceans, all of it in humanity's incredibly successful effort to create a safer, cleaner, more habitable world. And we did most of this using machines running on cheap, plentiful, reliable energy from fossil fuels. To be sure, using that energy has carried risks and created negative byproducts. But thanks to technology, we get better and better at minimizing and neutralizing those risks. Los Angeles was once smog city. Now, its air is cleaner than it's been in decades. London's Thames River was once clogged with sewage. Now, it's clean. So, if you want to live in an environment that is safe, healthy, and clean, highly industrialized countries are the place to be. Where previous generations faced the risk of disease from simply drinking water, which was often contaminated, we have clean water, thanks to man-made reservoirs, treatment plants, underground pipes, and indoor plumbing. Where previous generations walked streets contaminated by large quantities of human and animal waste, we can conveniently and safely dispose of it thanks to sewer systems and the waste management industry. Where previous generations faced large-scale death whenever there was a severe freeze or heat wave, we can live in a comfortable climate year-round, thanks to insulated homes and modern high-energy heating and air conditioning. And the list of such life-improving positives goes on. Thanks to industrial agriculture and transportation, we have grocery stores full of healthy food year-round. Thanks to modern transportation, we have unprecedented access to the rich cultural experiences and natural beauty that the world has to offer. Many of the benefits of today's environment are reflected in life expectancy and population statistics. The average person lives longer in better health than ever before. In sum, human beings have made the earth a far, far better place to live for ourselves. Yet even though life is better than ever, we are racked with guilt over our industrial development. We hear endlessly that our footprint, meaning our impact on nature, is too big, and that we must go green by making a smaller one. We are made to feel bad for the impact that we have on land, on water, on plants, on animals. But mastering nature is precisely how human beings survive and flourish. It's time to stop thinking about how to save the planet from human beings and resume thinking about how to improve the planet for human beings. I'm Alex Epstein of the Center for Industrial Progress for Prager University.
Are colleges across America rife with racism, sexism, and homophobia? If you answer, no, that's absurd, you probably have a fair amount of common sense. If you answer, yes, you're probably a college administrator. Wait, you might ask, college administrators accuse their own schools of being racist, sexist, and homophobic? How does that make any sense? To understand how a college administrator thinks, you must first, as the popular saying goes, follow the money. If you do, you will not only discover why college administrators declare their own colleges racist, sexist, and homophobic, but also why, if you're a student, your tuition keeps going up, and why, if you're a parent, your bank balance keeps going down. Here's how it works. If colleges are racist, sexist, and homophobic, the only way to change that, if you're a college administrator, is to create a massive diversity bureaucracy. And that, of course, is massively expensive. No institution provides a more vivid example than the University of California, a once great university system which is self-destructing in the name of diversity. The diversity ideology has encroached upon every aspect of the University of California's collective psyche and mission. It is the one constant in every university endeavor. It impinges on hiring, distorts the curriculum, and sucks up vast amounts of faculty time and taxpayer money. Even the university's ongoing budget problems have not touched it. Since 2010, UC San Francisco, UC San Diego, and UCLA have all created new vice chancellorships in diversity, equity, and inclusion, with salaries starting at $250,000 a year or higher. Each of these new posts is wildly redundant. Yet each new diversity position inevitably generates an even greater surge of junior bureaucrats, all sucking in tuition dollars. In 2011, UC Berkeley's Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion presided over a staff of 17. Yet just 1 year later, his staff had ballooned to 24. No wonder the number of administrators at the University of California almost equals that of the faculty. Here's an only partial list of the diversity bureaucracy at UC San Diego. The Associate Vice Chancellor for Faculty Equity, the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Diversity, the Staff Diversity Liaison, the Undergraduate Student Diversity Liaison, the Graduate Student Diversity Liaison, the Chief Diversity Officer, the Director of Development for Diversity Initiatives, the Director of the Cross-Cultural Center, the Director of the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Resource Center, the Director of the Women's Center. These diversity bureaucrats place nonstop pressure on departments to hire on the basis of race, gender, and sexual preference. Their trick is to set the hiring bar low enough to scoop in more female and minority candidates, and then declare that anyone above that bar is qualified enough to trump the most qualified candidate, when that candidate is a white or Asian male. But sometimes even that evisceration of standards isn't enough. In that case, the administration simply creates a new hiring category. In September 2012, after UC San Diego's electrical and computer engineering faculty refused to hire a mediocre female professor whom the administration had tried to force on them, the engineering school announced that it would be creating a, quote, excellence position, the school's Orwellian phrase for women and minorities who cannot get hired even after hiring standards have been lowered. Remember, these machinations are all in the service of a problem that doesn't exist. It's entirely fabricated. UC's campuses, like colleges throughout America, are easily the most welcoming and inclusive social environments in human history, at least if you're not a conservative. Female and minority students are surrounded by caring adults who are dedicated to their academic success. They enjoy opportunities for learning and self-development that are the envy of the world. As for the faculty, the idea that any academic department would reject the most qualified candidate simply because that candidate was black, Hispanic, female, or gay is absurd. Not to mention an entirely gratuitous insult to every faculty member on the hiring committees. Universities should be the institution in society that is the most dedicated to reason and evidence-based decisions. But with their crusade against their own make-believe racism and sexism, UC and almost every other American university betray that ideal every day. I'm Heather McDonald of the Manhattan Institute for Prager University.
Join Prager University.
What's profit, and why is it so important to everyone, not just business owners and entrepreneurs? Here's a simple quiz. When you spend $100 on a new pair of shoes, does the shop owner get to keep that $100? The answer, of course, is no. The shop owner has to pay all of his business costs, employee salaries, inventory, rent, supplies, taxes, and a dozen other expenses. His profit is what's left over. It's his payment for the time and money he spent and the risks that he's taken to keep his business going. Thank goodness for profits. Profits motivate people to work hard for themselves and make life better for others. Take the example of Bill Gates. How did he become so wealthy? The answer is that he came up with something that millions of people so wanted and needed that they reached into their pockets to pay for it. His Windows operating system, Word software, and other Microsoft products. What's more, he produced these products in a way that efficiently used resources. And what motivated him, and just about every other successful entrepreneur, to work so hard? The answer is profits. Without the incentive of profits, why would anyone spend his savings, work countless hours, and take all the risks necessary to bring their product or service to the marketplace? There's a simple answer. They wouldn't. You don't have to make billions like Bill Gates. Take a Montana cattle rancher who goes out in the dead of winter, even in blizzards, to feed his cows, to keep them safe, and care for them, making huge personal sacrifices so that New Yorkers can sit down to eat a nice steak. Why does the rancher do that? Do you think he does it because he loves New Yorkers? Of course not. The rancher tends to his cattle because he wants more for himself and his family. He wants profits. You can go to the supermarket any day of the week, and if you want steak, they have it. If you want potatoes, they have them. Sugar, salt, potato chips, strawberries, peanut butter, they have it. In fact, the average well-stocked supermarket in the United States has over 50,000 different items on its shelves. How does all that get there? It seems like magic, but it's not. Every one of those items is on the shelves thanks to one thing: profit. The same holds true for the device you're watching this video course on, whether it's a TV, a desktop or laptop computer, a smartphone, or a tablet, and for every component in those devices. They all exist as millions of other products we treasure and depend upon exist because of the profit motive. No profit, and it all goes away. Here's another reason the profit motive is so important. Ask yourself this question: which establishments do you tend to be most dissatisfied with? The answer is likely to be government agencies. Why? Because they don't operate for profit. So no one is rewarded for good work, and almost no one is ever punished for inferior work. And which establishments are you most satisfied with? The answer is likely to be the ones that operate on a for-profit basis. If I'm unhappy with, say, a department store like Macy's or Bloomingdale's because it's not providing me with the goods or services that I want, I can, in essence, fire that store by taking my business elsewhere. But consider a government agency like Department of Motor Vehicles or public schools. If I'm frustrated with their performance, I can't fire them because I don't have many alternatives. Business owners must please their customers or risk failure and bankruptcy. Government agencies risk nothing and therefore have to please no one. Am I saying we don't need government? That everything should be on a for-profit basis? Of course not. But what I am saying is that we should want as little government as possible. That's exactly what the founding fathers of our nation believed. They understood that the profit motive pushes people to do extraordinary things. Take that motivation away, and the world becomes a very different and darker place. I'm Walter Williams of George Mason University for Prager University.
Do more. That's what Americans demand of their presidents these days. A real president, Democrat or Republican, knows how to use the office. A real president makes things happen, or so the conventional wisdom. But actually, there is another model. A president can succeed through inaction by doing as little as possible. One such president was Calvin Coolidge. From the time he took office in 1923 to the time he left in 1929, Coolidge served a philosophy that was simple and powerful. Don't do. Coolidge was our great refrainer. The leadership style matched his personal style. Coolidge did not waste words, hence his nickname, Silent Cal. He did not grandstand. For these quiet ways, the 30th president absorbed much abuse. A Washington socialite, Alice Longworth, said that Coolidge looked like he had been weaned on a pickle. Coolidge cut a sharp contrast to Alice's father, Theodore Roosevelt, who had served a decade and a half earlier. And what a contrast Coolidge provided with another Roosevelt, Franklin, who came just a few years later. The refrainer is worth getting to know because he got the kind of results men of action long for today, especially economic results. Low unemployment, often well below 5%. Low taxes, higher wages, fewer strikes. New technology for the masses, a new car or a phone or radio. And most remarkable of all, a shrinking federal budget. If you remember just one fact about Coolidge's presidency, let it be this. Coolidge left the federal budget lower than he had found it. How did Coolidge do it? First, he resisted taking unnecessary action himself. Second, he imposed the same discipline on Congress. That wasn't easy. In the early 1920s, the progressive movement, whose impulse was, then as now, always to do something, was on the march. Progressive plans included more aid for agriculture, encouraging unions, increasing taxes, and nationalizing important industries, such as railroads and utilities. Coolidge blocked the progressives and thereby blocked their expansion of government. He vetoed farm subsidies twice, even though he personally came from an area of poor farmers, rural Vermont. Coolidge was sympathetic to farmers, but helping them wasn't the government's function. Coolidge also vetoed aggressive versions of the great entitlement proposal of his day, an entitlement that would have expanded the budget by billions, pensions for veterans, and he blocked the rise of militant labor unions wherever and whenever he could, a habit he had begun while still governor of Massachusetts. Coolidge made especially good use of the pocket veto, the ability of the president to veto a bill by simply not returning it to Congress. It is much more important to kill bad bills, he said, than to pass good ones. In total, Coolidge vetoed 50 times. The legislation Coolidge did endorse was designed to meet the same minimalist end, restrain the government. Together with his Treasury Secretary, Andrew Mellon, Coolidge lowered the top tax rate to 25%. Their goal was to shrink the public sector so that the private sector could expand, and the policy worked. The final example of the great refrainer's philosophy involves political sacrifice. The country liked Coolidge's thrift. The progressives won 17% of the vote in 1924, but Coolidge won the presidential election with more votes than the Democrats and progressives combined. So everyone, including the Republican Party, thought Coolidge would surely run a second time in 1928. But he declined. Typical of Coolidge, he thought he had done enough. Yes, it's possible to criticize Coolidge. As much as he tried to avoid it, Coolidge in the end signed bills he would have preferred not to. And the president showed a misguided penchant for protectionism, never a sound economic policy. Some suggest that Coolidge was responsible for the stock market crash and the decade-long depression that followed after he left office. But my own research for my Coolidge biography, Coolidge, suggests that claim is inaccurate. Indeed, researching another book, The Forgotten Man, I found evidence that too much action by Presidents Hoover and Roosevelt put the great in the phrase Great Depression. It is ironic that a man of such personal modesty presided over the era known as the Roaring Twenties. But that was the paradox. Coolidge was a Scrooge who begat plenty. Perhaps the day has come for a new politician to follow the great refrainer's guiding rule. Where others do, don't. And if you have to do less. I'm Amity Shlaes of the Coolidge Foundation and the King's College for Prager University.
You know, everybody wants to be happy. So why isn't everybody happy? The obvious answer is it's not easy. And one of the single biggest obstacles to being happy is that people naturally compare themselves to other people and assume nearly all of them are happier than they are. This is a big problem. So, how would you like an equation to determine the exact amount of unhappiness in your life? Well, I am here to tell you that I have developed an equation. It is U equals I minus R. U is unhappiness, I is image, and R is reality. The difference between the images you have had for your life and the reality of your life is the amount of unhappiness in your life, which gives you an idea of how powerful images are in hurting us. It's inevitable. Everybody has an image. As you grow up, you imagine what life will be when you get older. I had very, very powerful images, if I may be personal, and it'll help here to be personal because I have gone through this. I imagined that I would be happily married, never divorced, have 4 perfect children sitting around the table discussing politics and theology at every meal. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way. I was divorced. I was divorced with a child. And my kids didn't always want to talk. about theology and politics. Sometimes they didn't want to talk at all. Sometimes they wanted to talk about sports or about music that I couldn't stand. Now, I had to realize very early in my life that I would either have to abandon my image or I would be miserable the rest of my life. And this is true for just about everybody. Very few people live out the image that they had assumed their life would follow and become. That's what the midlife crisis in so many people is about, whether it is male or female. Especially for men, they reach 35, 45, 55, and then they think, wait a minute, I'm not nearly what I had assumed I would be in terms of accomplishment and achievement. I thought I would be the CEO. I thought I would be a president. I thought I'd be the president of the United States. I thought I would be earning this amount of money. I thought I would be one of the most respected members of my community. And then I would say every man ultimately fails the image that he has had for himself. That's the biggest part of what midlife crisis is about. Images kill people. Think of anorexia. Some teenage girls and young women have an image of how they want to look, and in some cases, they will starve themselves to meet that image. This is true for whatever images we have in our life. People imagine family life a certain way. They imagine a spouse a certain way. They imagine their children a certain way. They imagine their job a certain way. They imagine a whole host of things. And then those images are very often shattered. So what do you do about it? Well, there are two things. One, either develop a new image and enjoy that, or just celebrate the reality that you now have. Maybe the reality you now have is pretty darn good. You don't need an image to ruin it, because I promise you that that's exactly what the image will do. And that is why you equals I minus R. Unhappiness equals image minus reality. I'm Dennis Prager.
What is the most important date in American history? July 4th, 1776, the date of American independence? Or April 12, 1861, the first day of the Civil War that ended slavery in America? Or maybe December 7th, 1941, the day the Japanese Empire bombed Pearl Harbor, bringing America into World War II? Or how about this one? July 28th, 1588. Yes, 1588, that's 30 years before Plymouth Rock and almost 20 years before Jamestown, John Smith, and Pocahontas. So why is it such an important date in American history? First, a little background. In 1588, the most powerful man in the world was the King of Spain, Philip II. Flush with gold and silver from the New World, he had no rival save one, Queen Elizabeth of England. England was a Protestant nation, and Spain was Catholic, as was most of Europe. In addition to considering her a heretic, Philip hated her for two additional reasons. First, she was financing a rebellion by the Dutch Protestants against Spain in the Spanish Netherlands, which Philip controlled. And second, because she had executed her rebellious cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, like Philip, was a Catholic monarch. Philip felt that Mary, not Elizabeth, was the rightful heir to the English throne. Philip felt that with the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth had gone too far. The time had come, he decided, to discipline her and her heretic nation. He came up with an audacious plan. He would invade England. To do this, he needed a large army and lots of ships. He needed an armada, 130 ships that would carry 30,000 men. Philip was very rich, but not that rich. To build such a fleet, he would have to borrow heavily. But this wasn't much of an obstacle. Once he had conquered England, he could use the English treasury to pay off any debts. The Pope, wishing to see England return to the Catholic fold, promised additional financing. So the ships were built, the soldiers recruited. Most importantly, Philip had chosen a competent man to lead them, the Marquis de Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz asked for more time to prepare his ships and men. But Philip was impatient, far too impatient as it turned out. In a massive stroke of misfortune, the first of many, Santa Cruz died just before the Armada was set to sail. Rather than take the time to seek a new suitable replacement, Philip pushed ahead and appointed Duke Medina Sidonia to take command. There was only one problem. Sidonia was an army general. He had no naval experience. In fact, he'd never been out to sea. You can't hide 130 ships and 30,000 men. The English knew the Spanish were coming, and they were ready for them. What they lacked in firepower, they made up in maneuverability, familiarity with the treacherous English Channel, and the most capable and creative sea commanders of the age. Lord High Admiral Howard, Sir John Hawkins, and Sir Francis Drake. They knew they couldn't win a shootout with the Spanish. So instead, they launched a preemptive attack on the Spanish fleet while it was still docked in the French port of Calais. Setting a number of their own ships on fire, they sailed them into the port. The Spanish cut their anchors to flee the flaming English ships. But in their panic, they only made matters worse. The Spanish ships rammed into each other, tangling riggings, slicing sails, and crushing hulls. The vessels that weren't damaged were sitting ducks for the English cannon. Seeing that England had blocked their escape back to Spain, the badly wounded armada sailed north into the Atlantic, hoping to regroup. But then the weather turned, and Mother Nature finished what the English had started. When it was all over, only 76 of the 130 Spanish ships returned home, and half of the 30,000 men were now at the bottom of the ocean floor. Spain never challenged England again. Spain never challenged anyone again. It was finished as a great power. So why was the defeat of the Spanish Armada so important to American history? If the Armada had won, England would have become part of the Spanish Empire. There would have been no further English exploration of the North American coastline. In all likelihood, Spain, not England, would have colonized the eastern seaboard and expanded westward. Spain would have ruled America as it did South America. There would have been no 13 colonies, no 13 original United States. The America that we know would not exist. Without a United States of America, there would be no Declaration of Independence, no Constitution, no Bill of Rights. The whole concept of American democracy, an idea that profoundly changed human history, would be unknown. The defeat of the Spanish Armada on July 28, 1588, made America possible. I'm Richard McMillan, Professor of History at Pierce College for Prager University.
In the external or physical world, we're all aware of standard cause and effect, right? You know, object A acts upon object B with force X. We all get that because it applies to just about everything from electrons to athletes. But now consider events in your internal or mental world. What causes your thoughts? Some of our thoughts have external causes, like when we touch something and suddenly realize it's hot. We don't deliberate whether or not to pull our hand away, right? Our brain has already fired the instruction to do so, involuntarily. In some strange sense, we didn't really pull our hand away at all because we didn't choose to do it. Our brain did it before consulting us. A second cause of our thoughts is internal. Say you're thinking about giving a big presentation, and as you do so, you get increasingly nervous and your blood pressure and your heart rate jump up. Now, nothing external is acting upon you. You're doing all the causing internally, right? Your anxious thoughts are causing your brain to send signals to your heart, and we get that. But now I want you to consider a third category of your thoughts. It's your conscious choices. Something as simple as choosing where to go for lunch. Now, when you introspect, when you think about your thinking, do you believe that you're the active agent in charge of the process, or that you're just a passive recipient of the instruction? That you have no choice in the matter. It's all external forces, be they environmental, genetic, chemical, biological, or neurological. In other words, do you think all your thoughts have external causes beyond your control? Or do you think that you control some, if not most, of your thoughts? Now let's stay with our lunch example for a second. Back to the question. I ask you, where do you want to go for lunch today? Now, if all you are is a brain, an exhaustively physical system of neurons and synapses, then there's no you that's going to be making a choice at all. Your thought processes are basically just a complex series of colliding electron dominoes crashing into one another. It's just physical cause and effect, right? Something that can be exhaustively understood in terms of physics and chemistry. There's no you that's an agent that's deliberating or choosing or exercising free will. And that's why, if you are just a brain, you cannot have free will. You would just be a physical machine, a very complex but programmed computer. But if you're something more than your brain, if you're the thing that has the brain, then when I ask you, where do you want to go for lunch? You're going to start deliberating. You're going to be weighing your taste preferences, the commute time, perhaps even counting calories. You'd be weighing various reasons to choose one place over another. You wouldn't be caused to think about any of these things. You would choose to think about these things, and you could stop anytime you wanted to. So what we have here, therefore, are two different types of things, an immaterial mind and the material brain. You are the thing that has the brain. You are not your brain. Now look, even if you were the world's foremost brain expert and you knew what was happening with every electron in someone's brain at a specific particular moment, you still wouldn't have a clue about what's going on inside that person's mind. Surgeons can have access to my brain, but only I have access to my mind. This is what makes you human and not a machine. Psychology, the study of the mind, is not reducible to physics and biology and chemistry. Yet, there are many materialists, people who believe that physical matter is all that exists, that the only reality, including every thought, every feeling, every mind, every will, all of this is totally explained in terms of matter in motion, simply physical phenomena. These materialists believe that we're no more than robots and that free will is an illusion, a myth. Now, why do they believe this? Because they understand that the moment they acknowledge that free will exists, that there really is an immaterial you beyond the physical realm, that there really is a mind, not just a brain, then there has to be something non-physical that accounts for our non-physical minds. Now, when you exercise your free will and you choose to think about all of this, you're going to probably reason, just like I did, that there's a great mind that accounts for the origin of your mind. But again, that's your choice. It's evidence of your free will. I'm Frank Pastore for Prager University.
Join Prager University.